Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. It's a new year and a new chance for AppSec to shine. So let's set ablaze all the AppSec cliches. No more shifting, no more lists, just good defaults in our midst. No more chasing CVEs, no more leaking secret keys. Let's have a secure design solution and avoid this AppSec noise pollution. Which means this week we chat with Ixchel Ruiz about a developer's perspective on security and creating secure designs. Stay fresh and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
AI is transforming applications, but with innovation comes new risks. Enter Noma, the first application security platform built to secure the entire data and AI lifecycle. From your AI supply chain to models and runtime, Noma protects it all. With a single platform that integrates seamlessly across your data pipelines, Jupyter Notebooks, ML Ops tools, code, and application SDKs, Noma delivers full lifecycle visibility, security, and compliance. Start securing your data and AI lifecycle at securityweekly.com/Noma. This is episode 313, recorded January 13th, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with lucky John Kinsella. I think so. Hello, John.
At least it's, the Monday the 13th, not like, or the 13th on Monday, not on a Friday. So it's not...
Exactly.
Could be worse.
Could be worse. There could be a Jason Voorhees out there, but instead there is a Kalyani Pawar out there. Hello, Kalyani.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here today.
Excellent. Happy to have you here as well. And we have Ixchel Ruiz, who has been developing software applications and tools since 2000. Her technical research interests include server-side languages like Java, dynamic languages, client-side technologies, testing, automation, and observability. Her humanities research interests include personal, professional, and organizational development and transformation. She's been a Java champion, Oracle Ace Pro, Test Containers Community Champion, CDF Ambassador, Hacker Garden Enthusiast, and Open Source Advocate. Hello, Ixchel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Good. Well, and so are we, because one of the reasons we like having people like you on, developers, is we want to get away from some of the things some of the AppSec cliches, like developers don't care about security. So, just to check, I have to start off the top. Ixchel, do you care about security?
Yes. I mean...
There was a pause.
There was a pause. Sounded suspicious.
Exactly. I mean, as you have said, there are so many cliches, and people will say, like, this is not under my scope. This is not under my review. But what we don't like, and I can tell you that, is reworking again and again one feature. And if we don't care about testing, if we don't care about quality, if we don't care about security, it will come back to us. So on that big loop that can take, it's horrible for developers to face like the ghost from Christmas past. And if you have to face it more than once, it's even beyond annoying. So we want to create or fulfill the features, send them in, ship it, and forget about it in terms of we don't want to see it again.
Yes, and I think, developers don't care about, or they care about annoying things, but they don't care to spend their time over and over on annoying things. It's kind of how I hear how you're putting that. One of the aspects, too, if you're talking about developers, I'll just describe it as software quality, ship it and forget it because ostensibly feature complete, there's no bugs. We know that bugs creep in, but I think you've made the point before that for a long time testing would be kind of done at the end of a development cycle. But now we have, I'm just going to say DevOps for shorthand, but we have developers testing their own code. There's test-driven design approaches, things like that. How does that change in testing influence developers' approach to the bugs that just happen to be security as well? Is this a healthier approach that we should be trying to encourage for development?
Well, we had a previous conversation, Mike, and it was very interesting because we were talking about, again, the other cliches. Like, as a developers, we already have a lot of responsibilities in our heads. We need to know a specific programming language. We need to know the domain. We need to know the architecture. We need to know our tools. And on top of that, when all the DevOps revolution started, they started like, now you have to worry about infrastructure. You have to worry about infrastructure, and now you need to know how to deploy. You need to know about cloud. You need to know all that stuff that we didn't know. And at the beginning, it was like, whoa. So I have to be a specialist either in the technology or the domain or in a specific library. And on top of that, you're giving me more responsibilities. Then comes security. And you're like, well, this sounds like DevOps, like already operations. And now it's in a domain that I have even less time to keep up. Because this is a moving target that it goes so fast that you're telling me I not only have to have a good knowledge, but almost a discretionary knowledge about which one should I be using. For example, and I make you the example of Alpine. At some point when you verify the Alpine Docker image with many scanners, it had a lot of vulnerabilities there. So, and for us, Alpine is not even under our development. It's not under our control. And suddenly somebody comes and says, like, your software is vulnerable. And you're like, okay, so Docker images and the OCI containers were something that I inherit because of this DevOps idea. Okay, granted. I didn't create it. I'm not writing that code. But you're telling me that it is important for me. So, okay, which one should I take care of? And the answer was like, that's an excellent question. and the developer was like,
just fix all of them, right?
Yes.
All of them are important. All of them are, yeah.
And everything was coming under the umbrella. We want secure applications. We want secure environments. We want a secure strategy. And again, and I told you before also, when everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. So nothing can, honestly, we're developers. So far, not even computers nor humans can write something perfect. I wish we could, but perfection is not something that we can achieve any day of the year. So there are going to be problems, and we need to be very sure where do we want our full attention. We want to be perfectionist, or at least try to attain that perfection.
Well, and I think part of that comes is not only we're not all cats, which are probably the most perfect thing out there, right? That's why I have so many pictures of them. But part of it is you're pointing out, like, we're dealing with code that other people have written. Here's code in this container in Alpine, etc., or third-party dependencies that we're pulling in for our Python or NPM, etc. But this is nothing that you personally, or me, or John, or Kalyani as a developer perhaps has written themselves that need to fix their own bugs. We're just spending time on everything but the code we should be writing. So if I did actually just set aside that part of, do we even have to fix everything of all these dependencies? I wanted to turn the conversation more towards, the code that we're writing ourselves. Mm-hmm. In the sense of, Ixchel, if you're doing your own development, you're working with the development team, what are the approaches you take to try and answer that question of, is our code secure? Or how secure is our code? Or when we release, will there be a bug that just so happens to fall under a bug bounty umbrella because it's a security bug as opposed to something functional or something like that?
Well, I think nobody here will disagree that prevention is the best way to solve an issue. When you don't even have an issue, then it's solved by definition. So for me, when I belong to a team where we have a really well-defined architecture, where we have even the security context defined, we have tools and ways to verify, for example, the separation of concerns, or even at the package level, that we are not violating some constraint that is important. For example, ARC42, it's really important. If we are also specifying the open policies for example, in language, yes, that makes us really, for developers, it's going to be easier because we know what is the requirement. It's very specific. We know what we should be minding the most. There is kind of already a priority in terms of what is the module, what is the microservice, what is the service, what is the function, what is the path that we want, or the customer or all the stakeholders are interested on.
And that's a good example because there's the aspect of, I want to touch on that requirements point that you made, because you're talking about the requirements for what we're building, you're talking to product managers, perhaps you have use cases, etc. When you talk to an AppSec team, and this could be either a generic AppSec team or, personal history you've had with them, and they come, what is a good requirement that they bring to you versus a bad requirement? For example, if I just said, okay, your requirements for this app are to be secure. That's your security requirement. I'm guessing that's a little bit vague. So help me as the naive AppSec person coming to you, give you a better security requirement to work against.
Well, in this case is, what could it be? I'm trying to think in a very important or easy to understand scenario where we do get the definition of what it is important with the right priority and for example, the context. But you are the expert, so and your audience are the expert. Well, they know about these topics. When we're talking about the security risk, the security context risk, we're talking about the separation of the boundaries between components, or the workflow on a specific path of the different consumer that you have. For example, the requirements of API or a third party that is connecting to our API. We already know that we have, for example, different levels of access. We have different privileges. We have different levels of information, the verbosity that we want to incorporate or not. So all this can be formalized, and that is already like for example, open policy agent. Rego, that is a good requirement specification for something.
Yeah, I think, and it's important that you're calling out what's the context, because I was being purposely vague and just saying here your requirement is to be secure, but bringing in just that context or that example of authorization, privilege, different levels of privilege. It also would come around to test cases, because I can imagine that developers perhaps immediately think of affirmative test cases. Is this working as intended? Whereas a security person may come through in the sense of what can be abused, or what is the default behaviors if there's ambiguity or edge cases. I think these are the types of things that I'm trying to perhaps tease out or talk through for our audience in terms of how to have an architecture discussion that involves everything but the phrase threat modeling, because we're, I think, kind of hinting at threat modeling, even though we're not actually saying it. So one of the other ways of maybe approaching this is in the sense of the requirements. How do we know when you're done with the requirement? How did you measure it? How do you know you're secure? And I'm curious if there are examples that you've used either from just the development side of we're done with this feature, we've completed this feature, that you could also share this is how you would expect or hope to hear from a security requirement, or being able to have a security team say, yeah, this is ready to ship, versus, oh, you're not quite perfect yet. We're going to prevent you from going out into the crazed wilderness of the internet.
And I totally agree with you. We were also discussing about who is our audience. If we're designing an application that is only going to be used for kids, maybe, and the two levels of interaction, it's a button and something like that. The security, it is important. It will always be important. I mean, we don't want to be accessed we don't want to be carried on by the natural complexities of accessing something to validate that this application is secure. But the total, like the context of having this very simple application with the stakeholders or consumers that by their own nature may not be the most savvy users, but also kids are amazing, towards or on the other side of the spectrum, if this is going to be an application that is going to be handled by expert users, almost hackers, the context is totally different. And maybe we also need to spend more time of our resources in terms of budget, manpower, etc., into gearing towards security because of the context is totally different. In the context in terms of the users. So, for example, one important thing is you have the happy patch, and you also have the, oh my goodness, this is something that has happened in the past. These applications have been exposed to this kind of improper use, or this is an environment where you will be working on. This is your noisy neighbors. This is where you have to either succeed or you're going to fail. Because also thinking about the worst thing that can happen, and if you're ready to face it and you're ready to survive, if something of the worst can happen, it is important.
And I think I wanted to jump in there too, to highlight when you're talking about what's the worst that could happen, that's very much a threat modeling question, part of that 4-question framework of what are we building? And you kind of were highlighting this is for a particular type of audience, particular type of persona, workflows. What bad could go wrong, or what's the worst that could go wrong, tends to be a really healthy type of question to get developers to start thinking about the context of their app and like, we thought about this workflow and it could fail this way, but we really don't hope someone doesn't misuse it in this way. We don't think they will, but if they do, XYZ might happen. And I know I see you nodding your head along, Kalyani, too. I'm not sure if this part of it starts to trigger some thoughts around that in particular, if there's some other angle that you would bring into this conversation.
I mean, we were talking about context-aware security and threat modeling, and then moving on to security requirements, right? And I think an important aspect of a lot of software is the use of open source tools, right? Open source packages. And last year we were talking about executals, where there was a whole backdoor installed by different personas behind a GitHub account. And this package is widely used. The impact was widespread, right? And it's not like SolarWinds, where it was a socially engineered attack more than anything. And so I think my question is, what are some effective ways that maintainers of open source packages can place guardrails against these attacks or ensure more security so the lives of developers and security professionals will get easier?
For that, I also belong to the OSSF Foundation, and they have, for example, the scorecards and also the mini guide to know, as a developer, the scorecards will tell you how good you're doing in terms of heuristics, and you can focus your attention into those ones. For the consumers, that they can also get some numbers into saying, this library seems to be in better shape than that one because of maturity, because of releases, because of whatever you put into your priority list. Because it could be licensing, it could be patches, it could be the cadence of release roadmap. We have different necessities. Again, there's no silver bullet. There you have to make compromises. So I think that is also important.
And it's great to bring up the OpenSSF scorecard, because that does start to at least point to a metric a degree of metrics in the sense of what are you doing in terms of practices around development. I don't think I would quite position it as this is a secure app. It's more of this app has some secure behavior behind it. And I see you starting to smile there as I'm describing this to Shell. So clearly there's something there that resonates. Tell us a bit more about, what your thoughts are on the scorecard.
The part that it was, I totally remember, it was the metrics, because this app is not secure. This app is not fast. The question is, as what? What is my threshold? What is the percentage that I'm aiming for? Against what you're telling me to do something. And that is important for developers, because if you tell me this application is not fast enough, I will ask you, well, what is fast enough? Are you asking me to write a microservice that is going to provide a service during, what was this, the Singles Days in China or in Japan? I can already guarantee you that the server will not very reliably provide this service, because it's a huge amount of request in that particular moment. So this is also important. How much? What is the percentage? How can I check? If you tell me the application that we want to use has to have a specific score, for whatever metric that you want to take into consideration, then I have something to start working with. I'm not going to use LeftPad, probably.
Not anymore. Yeah, there's so that'll be another tangent about just how many libraries out there that are 4 or 5 lines of code that are being reused, when you could have just written them yourself or have your own library with that. But before we can come back to that tangent, because I see everybody wanting maybe to do that.
Go ahead.
What's
sort of interesting about that, though, is we've talked about this before, but the reason we have a lot of folks out there using that 4-line library is because they don't know better, right? Either they are a junior coder, or they made a typo, or they're just they've been working for 3 days straight. I don't know. There's some reason.
Fair.
How do you, when you're designing a project or sort of taking those specifications we've been talking about, how do you ensure that the developers, when they get that end to-do list, so, here's an issue, here's a ticket, go work and code this thing. How do you make sure they don't go and do something like use one of those 4-line libraries?
Okay, in my case, and it's very sad to sometimes realize this, I'm a Java developer, so our build tools are usually Maven and Gradle. We have still systems like Ant, or who knows. I love Maven and I love Gradle, actually, but one of the sessions that I give the most frequently is about Maven, because it's very sometimes surprising that the common majority, for example, from Java developers, have still not grasped the full understanding of Maven, how to navigate the transient or direct dependencies. And let's face it, Maven, when it was developed in version 3, it had some interesting rules about the transient dependencies versus direct dependencies. So we have even a trivia, and people are so into it, because we ask for their knowledge, and suddenly it's not so clear. And this is the thing that I want to bring to the audience. Our dependencies are super important. It's not a line of code in a POM or a properties file. The reason why you're putting it there should be a deliberate, conscious idea. You have to classify your dependencies into critical, and obviously you will spend a lot more time defining which are your critical dependencies. Probably it's a framework, probably it's a library, big library. You will have the luxury ones on the other side of the spectrum. For example, the one that maybe indents something or maybe help you do something. And you also need to specify what is your level of dependency, what is the risk that each kind of dependency is bringing into the project. And the other extra step is every single development dependency that you add in development for a legacy system is going to create more problems when you want to refactor, re-engineer, or redesign that system. So even the dependency management has a different life cycle of managing depending on which cycle or which part of the cycle you are. In development, you want a lot of development dependencies that help you with, I don't know, models or types or something like that. But as soon as you reach a maturity level for your specific software, you can remove them, because if this software is going to, or this application is going to live a long life, and coming from Java, from the Java applications where they usually are, I mean, we don't have, or we don't want to rewrite our applications every 3 or 4 years when the framework is already totally new. Java will remain. So our systems are going to be designed or are going to be implemented for running for at least 1 decade or 2. Java, it's almost 30 years old. So, and we still have the backwards compatibility. So these concerns have been in my industry, well, in my particular programming language and how we develop applications for a very, very long time.
And that's where, too, doesn't even with Maven, and we could generalize this, I think, to most of the way that programming languages track their dependencies, it's not always just in a single XML file, or like in Ruby land, a single gem file. It tends to be, we thought we had all of our dependencies enumerated in this one spot, but look what snuck in, because it was either used for testing or there's a different way you could do this. How does, corralling dependencies, how often are you thinking of that from a developer perspective just to keep your life sane versus a security perspective to figure out just what are you using and does it even have that risk to your application?
The teams that I have worked, we have that from the get-go. So we have like what we call sandboxes environments where, for example, our Maven Central, our own repository, Artifactory repository, it follows certain policies. It's already curated. And that is for mostly production. For production applications. In our sandbox, we are not limited. You can install whatever you want because you're doing POCs. Go nuts. Try your idea. See if this works. But when it reaches a level of, this is actually looking promising, then it's the moment where we review. Are these dependencies, like we classify them? Do we really need them? And why do we need them? And why did you choose this particular one versus the other one? But again, we don't do it with all the dependencies because it doesn't make sense. It's too much.
Good luck. It's not going to scale either, right? Yeah.
Exactly. But at least you know the level of dependency. If we remove this one, are you going to cry? Or you're only going to be annoyed?
And that's, sorry, my apologies, coughing. And that's interesting because, are you using this? Is this important? All of those, I'm guessing, are influenced by developer perspective. And in other words, this is solving this problem or this is making this easier. Does something like security sneak into that in the sense of you're looking at the scorecard and saying, well, this dependency hasn't been maintained, it has been updated for 2 years or a year, or the maintainers are kind of anonymous and we're not sure about the maintainers, or it hasn't run a SAST scanner or doesn't have fuzzing hooked up to it. These are very much scorecard related things. Do those sneak into that conversation, or is it more about developer and this is useful to me versus not useful to me?
No, it totally goes, because, for example, if you're using it as a state machine library and suddenly it is integral part of your application, and something goes wrong when you have created this very intricate and complex model, and suddenly you need the support from a patch, you find a bug. Now you need to talk to the developers of that, or maintainers or contributors of that particular project. And if it's already in zombie mode, good luck with getting a patch. Good luck with getting the next release. So at some point, we know that having somebody answering on the other side of the email or chat or whatever we use for contact them, and it's responsive, it is important.
And part of that then maybe becomes, how often have you seen we're going to take over this dependency and fork it or own it ourselves versus just swap it out? Like, because there comes a point, especially you mentioned tech debt, legacy applications. There's a point where the app has to keep running, but that
Yes.
dependency needs some tender loving care, and somebody's got to do that. So, do you run the home for adopting orphan dependencies?
Well, in my bio, you said open source advocates. I also not run, but I help organizing hacker gardens. In hacker gardens, what we try to do is contribute back to open source. What it is like, imagine a hackathon happens weekly or monthly or whatever it is around the world. And the whole point is developers eating pizza, the social part, and also working in teams into going into open source projects, finding a bug or finding an issue and working on it. So this is what I try to encourage. If you decide to fork a library because you have a problem, if your answer is yes, you have now two problems. So it's not worth it. And I mean, history has taught us that it is a very risky situation. Structs, remember, we have that issue.
Yeah, that was the exeutils example that Kalyani, brought up. And maybe one last question on that aspect is, let's say, how could there's a great appeal for open source projects to get help, hands-on keyboards, to type some code, fix some address some PRs, fix some bugs, etc. Look at those issues. How could a project maintainer who wants help get themselves into Hacker Garden? Do they need to bring their own pizza? Do they just need to send you an email? What's a good process there for them?
Well, what I recommend to all open source, that they have labels in their issues. They provide some issues, low-hanging fruits, perfect for first contributions, because then there is the October also for open source, where a lot of people around the world start working in open source. So for people that are starting to contribute back to software, to open source software, these are excellent entry points. There is a lot about how do we make our community more welcoming, like how improve your documentation, create badges, gamify something. There are ways to if you are an open source developer or contributor or project lead and don't want to belong to a specific foundation. There is, for example, foundations. You can try to belong to Eclipse Foundation or the Linux Foundation. In our case, the Apache Foundation or the Common House Foundation. You can go and look at what the different foundations offer you. Some of them have these programs that try to attract more contributors to a specific project, like being a matchmaker in terms of what you want to learn, where do you want to develop yourself, and what are the applications that are out there. I can totally recommend people to go to the Common House Foundation, because another interesting point is money. This is most of the times, there are several reasons why developers go into open source and dedicate so many hours of their time into doing this. But one thing that you can start listening to people of contributors is that money is usually tied. This is a labor of love. I always use the example of the Maven. Maven in the Java world, which actually runs a lot of enterprise applications, 70% of the projects depend on Maven. And Maven is developed only by people on their free time. No company sponsors them. So imagine that. 5 people dedicating their time.
And we've seen, unfortunately, we can't imagine a lot of the outcomes of that, because even exeutils, which, was brought up already, part of the reason that there was a loss of trust or in the maintainer was because the bad actor came in and said, you, original maintainer, are overwhelmed. Look at all these bugs that just happens a bunch of sock puppets were being very loud about, and you're doing this for free. I'll take this over for you. So that's unfortunately the extreme case, or perhaps not so extreme case, of doing this for doing maintenance for love without the monetary support, let alone pizza support, things like that. But Ixchel, you've given us some great areas to think about and how to work and talk with the developers about getting beyond just the requirement of make it secure. We've come against our own dependency limit of time, but I do got to sneak in one last question for you. We've been asking all of our guests to describe AppSec in 3 words. So right here at the end, I'd love to hear what your take on that would be.
Oh my God, hard, easy.
It's not 3 words.
Well, we'll have OMG. That'll count as a single word. Once again, yeah. See, maybe that was a vague requirement specification, and we've got a good hack of it. But Ixchel, thank you for that. You brought some smiles to our faces, and we had a fun conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank John and Kalyani as well. I want to thanks everyone who's been listening. We're going to take a quick break now and return with news of the week.